Hey, everybody, welcome to the Going for Two podcast. This is a podcast where, experience, maybe just not our cup of tea. Like, we're just kind of winging it. And, we've got maybe someone with a little more expertise on the sport of basketball with us today. Ben, why don't you tell us about our guest?
Thanks, Logan. Yeah, so for today's guest, we've got one of our old friends from college. We've got Selvin Villeda coming on the show today. One of the reasons we brought him on is because when Logan and I don't know a ton about a topic, we like to outsource that information and bring on somebody who does know more about the topic than we do. And we're going to be discussing the alternative routes to the NBA that are being taken by some of these big name players coming out of high school today. But before we get into that, Selvin, what's going on, man? It's good to see you.
Good to see y'all too, man. How have y'all been?
Pretty good. Little stir crazy, but I think everybody's going stir crazy right now. You watch Tiger King yet?
I did not. No.
Logan, what about you?
I did. I watched everything except for the last new episode, so I'm up to date.
Yeah, I think Selvin with med school and the whole becoming a doctor / being a doctor thing, you got a little bit more important things to do than watch Tiger King. So I completely understand that.
So
it's been different.
Selvin, can you give us and our audience, just a list of your elaborate accomplishments and qualifications to speak on today's episode?
I mean, I've been, played basketball for a while, for a couple of probably since seventh grade, played the AU circuit, got to play with a lot of cool players, got to play against a lot of NBA pros, Julius Randle, Emmanuel Mudiay, some of those guys who are in Dallas area. I got to play with Jordan Mickey, who's with the Celtics or was a couple of years ago. So I've gotten to see kind of the different talent that's out there and gotten to see the options that they have. So maybe I can provide some insight on that.
That's awesome. So you said you played against Emmanuel Mudiay. Do you remember? Do you remember a guy on? Did you play against his high school team or his AAU team?
Yeah, high school team. So Isaiah Austin was there too.
Yeah. Do you remember a kid named Zach Gormley?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't. He didn't play a whole lot, I don't think. But I went to junior high with Zach Gormley. He went to Van, and then he and his family moved to the Dallas area and ended up playing on that team.
Yeah, that was a pretty good team. They got some length, they got some athleticism, a couple pros on there, so it wasn't too fun to play against them.
That is a great person to start our conversation with, right, Ben? Emmanuel Mudiay.
It is. That's a perfect segue. I appreciate that, Selvin. I don't know if you had that in mind, but it's a good team we're working on right now. So as I said, the topic that we wanted to pick your brain about is just this kind of phenomena that's happening within the pipeline to the NBA. Initially, after 2005, the one and done rule was instituted, and people had to go through college basketball to get into the NBA. And I have been a big fan of that process, being up in Duke territory recently and seeing all the one and dones through Zion and Marvin Bagley going through. It's been a lot of fun, but a lot of people, top high school players, are transitioning to different methods for getting into the NBA. Some of the recent big names, such as Jalen Green, the number one high school player in his class, deciding to go a different route. LaMelo Ball, RJ Hampton, both playing in Australia. RJ Hampton playing for the New Zealand Breakers. And, even as you were talking about, Emmanuel Mudiay and Brandon Jennings had their own start overseas. And so we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this a little bit more, but I just kind of want to start this dialogue and get your general input on this phenomena, what's happening, hear your take on it. And if we want to whittle it down to a more specific question, I want to know, why do you think this is becoming attractive to all of these players?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason it's becoming an attractive thing is money. It all comes down to money. A lot of these guys come from, lower socioeconomic statuses, have struggles with family, whether they need a house, a car, food, whatever it may be. And going to college doesn't really provide any money for them with the current collegiate rules that they have right now. I think that's one of the big motivating factors. And also, it's, you go 1 year in college, let's say you get hurt. There's an example. Harry Giles, who went to Duke, #1 recruit out of high school, joins Duke, tears his ACL. Now is fighting as a second-round pick, making a lot less money than what he could have been if he came straight out of high school. So there's risk and benefits to it, but for them, I think it comes down to what can get me to the NBA faster, and these new avenues seem to be pretty good options.
Yeah, definitely. I really appreciate you reminding me about the Harry Giles situations. Yeah, that was tough to watch. Yeah, I think you made a great point about the money because, obviously the NCAA is not going to be able to provide money, but I'm interested to hear your take as well on the NCAA Board of Governors coming out and saying, hey, we're going to push for this compensation due to likeness of NCAA players. Do you think that's going to have any change and maybe draw some people back into college basketball or not really?
Yeah, I think it will. I think because at the end of the day, I think the best competition is, in the NCAA when you're playing in those Big Six conferences or abroad. And so if you can do that and stay in the U.S. as opposed to having to move your whole life for 1 year, I think that players will want to go through that route. But I don't know. I think the NCAA said it's going to be up to the states, right? It's not like a nationwide thing. It's going to be up to the state that player plays in.
That I'm not sure. I'll defer to you on that. But yeah, I know my understanding is that it's in progress, but hasn't been finalized yet. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding. But I know that the state of California has said players can make money off of their own likeness now if they're college basketball or college players. And so I think it's going to be a state-by-state thing. And so we might see all the best players go to one state and go to those schools just because that's where they're going to make the money. So yeah, that might be interesting to see what happens with that.
So I heard a theory that this being able to make money off your likeness may benefit some of the smaller schools more than your big time programs because there's the theory that they're already making money under the table.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there's no doubt. So what they were saying is is a player that is recruited to be a backup at Kentucky going to go to a second tier program where they're going to be the star in, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to use Abilene as an example. It's not the greatest example, but if that player can go to Abilene and get endorsed by the biggest car dealership, whereas if they go to Kentucky and are a backup, they're not going to make any money.
Right.
Does that benefit the smaller programs more than the bigger programs?
I think it'll benefit them, absolutely. But at the end of the day, the money's important, but these kids, the NBA, this has been their goal from when they started playing basketball. And so they do go to a smaller school. Does that hinder their draft stock? Does that make them less attractive because they play less competition? And so it might help the small schools, but it really it's going to come down to what the player wants.
Yeah, I think that's a good take. And especially your point about money, because, they can only make so much of the NCAA getting money from, their likeness. But if they are going overseas, I think the G League salary was at one point it was $125K, and now I heard it went up to $500,000.
Yeah,
and so
it's $500K.
And then and then overseas it's about, you can make upwards of
$500,000 more. Yeah.
So that if you're looking at it from a pure money perspective, that's going to be a lot more enticing to go any route other than the college basketball, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and I think that's why college basketball threw out this idea now is because they're scared. We're going to lose all our star players. Is college basketball just going to become those 4-year guys? Is that what it's going to become? And then they lose a bunch of money there. And so they're definitely trying to adapt. But with the NBA and that new G League development thing that they've thrown out there, that's really going to hinder, I think, NCAA basketball, and which is sad because everyone loves March Madness. Everyone loves watching the college rivalries that go on, and so. I hope that students can or athletes still choose the NCAA route, but at the end of the day, they're going to choose what's best for them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you've already lost LaMelo Ball, Jalen Green from participating in March Madness. Some of the players that would be the most fun to watch to overseas play, and it is going to hinder college basketball. So one of the when I was thinking about this episode, one of the routes that I was thinking, I was going back in my fourth, is this a good route for players to take? And I was thinking about it kind of in two different scenarios. So one, if you are a big name player like a Jalen Green or LaMelo Ball or something like that coming out of high school, it seems like the path to the NBA is actually better to play in one of these alternative leagues than it is to go into college basketball, because A, you get money, and B, you may not have that lack of load management. You may be able to not play in all the games, but with Zion, the spotlight's always on you. You've always got to play all the games. And what happens? Well, he ended up getting hurt for a little bit at Duke.
Yeah.
But if you are someone who is not a huge name and you're trying to make a name for yourself and you're trying to get in the NBA, perhaps maybe college basketball is the route for you instead of going overseas. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, look at let's just take these years. The freshman this year, like James Wiseman, he didn't have to go to Memphis for a year. There's a reason that he left early. It's because he doesn't want to be there. He's ready out of high school to go ahead in the NBA. And one rule that I thought would be nice is get rid of the one and done. But if you do go to college, you have to stay at least 2 years, because a lot of development can happen in those 2 years. I'm in Lubbock right now, and Jarrett Culver came out as a sophomore. Was a 5th or 6th pick, something like that, by the Timberwolves a couple of years ago. His freshman year, he was a 3-star recruit. He wasn't really well known. He stayed at Tech. He worked hard. He worked in the summer, got back, and he took him to the finals. And now that increases draft stock. Could he have done that overseas or in the G League? I don't think so. And so, I definitely think that your thought process of if you're a good player that needs improvement, you go NCAA, because you get strength and conditioning coaches. You get coaches that have done it before and have improved players. But if you're a guy like James Wiseman or Jalen Green or LaMelo Ball who's really ready to go, just go make some money, go play against actual competition, really good adult competition, and get ready for the NBA.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are really good points. You mentioned the one and done rule. They have quite a few years till they'll be able to revisit that. But what do you think is the future for that rule?
I think it's going to go. I really think they're going to really allow players, if you're ready for the NBA. I mean, look at the type of players that have come out just straight out of high school. You got Kobe, you got Kevin Garnett, Tracy McGrady, even late on like Dwight Howard, Monta Ellis. Those kind of players were ready from day one. Let them go from day one and let them have longer careers. Let them, develop in the NBA as well. So I think it'll be a rule that will be changed, maybe like a college football type rule, 2 years or 3 years, just kind of depending on what they want. NCAA at the end of the day wants to keep these players because that's what makes them money.
Yeah. So that's a good point.
I definitely like what you said about changing it to not just one and done, but 2 or potentially 3. I believe that's what college baseball does. Is you can get drafted right out of high school, go to the minors, or if you go to college, you got to stay 3 seasons. So you're not eligible to be drafted again until you're finished your junior season, your 3rd season on the team. So 2 questions. One, and most important, is this developmental league just a step in the direction of eliminating the one and done? And part 2, is it all orchestrated by LeBron James trying to get his son in the league at the same time as he is?
I'll answer that second part. I don't think he's got it. I think he's got bigger things to fry right now than dealing with a 15-year-old kid. He's gonna let him, go through high school and let him do his thing. The first question, for that first question, I mean, who knows? Is this the NBA kind of stepping in and saying, we want these players early on, or is this the NCAA saying, hey, NBA, you need to do something so we don't lose these kids overseas? It's hard to know who's kind of driving this. It kind of seems like the NBA is. They want to get the G League to be more popular, because when you think of the minor leagues in baseball, you think, oh, there's some good talent there. When you think about the G League in basketball and the NBA, you think, oh, it's just players who couldn't make it, And so maybe by adding these high-profile players, they're going to try to increase the popularity of the G League to where people actually go to G League games, and the NBA can rely on kind of 2 leagues as they're going on.
So that was a question that I heard raised on another podcast is what's the NBA's angle with this? How are they going to make money in the G League?
I mean, people show up. If you tell me Jalen Green's playing in Lubbock and he's in a G League team, guess what? I'll be there at most home games because it's the type of player that you'll get to see once in a lifetime. Like, he's a once-in-a-lifetime generational player, and getting to say, yeah, I got to see him play for a whole year, like that's going to bring in revenue, that's going to bring in tickets, that's going to bring in people popularity for the G League. And so I think that would be their angle, is let's try to get as many people here in the G League in smaller towns, because most G League teams are in the outskirts of the major NBA teams. And so maybe that's a way for them to get more of the country involved as well. So like, imagine having a G League team in Seattle that has, a Jalen Green, or in Vegas, or in towns that really crave that basketball. I think it could be a good way that the NBA can reach out to those cities.
So, we're talking about all these different paths to the NBA, and so far we've named going overseas, like RJ Hampton and LaMelo Ball have, playing in the G League. Some players are even opting to just take a year off and train.
Yep.
There are reports saying that, some players would have really benefited from that. So up here, Trevon Duval was he was a really good point guard, and he was the number one point guard coming out of high school, coming out of class, but he didn't have a jump shot, and that really showed while he was at Duke, and that pushed him back in the draft. And so some people are saying, if he went and trained for a year and developed his jump shot and then entered the draft, he would have been much higher. So given those three scenarios, taking off a year in training, playing overseas, or just going ahead and playing in the G League, which one of those three do you feel like would benefit the player most from a player development perspective?
I think it's really just a player-to-player thing. I think those guys who are doing the 1 year and just training, a lot of the times it's you and a trainer, and you kind of lose the mind, like the mind for basketball, the way it looks on 5-on-5 on a court. When you're just doing one-on-one with a trainer, you're not really practicing how a player moves, how to, open angles for passes and open angles for shooting and use a screen and all that kind of stuff. You don't get that when you're training. So I think, like, your example is good. Trevon Duval, he can do the pick and roll. He had good handles. He was athletic. He could do everything except shoot. He could have benefited from that, Someone like LaMelo Ball, who has all the tools but just kind of needs to play a little more, could definitely benefit from actually just playing against good players, because he played in high school and he just played against people that weren't good. And so he could just shoot from half court and then be fine. But when he's in a league to where he needs to be an actual player and really play the game of basketball, it's all about repetition there and getting as many reps as you can to really refine what he's good at and know what he's bad at. And so it just kind of depends on a player by player thing. And maybe the G League provides the best of both worlds. You got NBA caliber trainers and NBA caliber coaches, as well as, NBA caliber talent if we get all these high prospects in there. So the G League may actually be the better option. We just don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
So you mentioned LaMelo and the route that he took. He was on the path originally to probably follow his brother's footsteps if it wasn't for his the middle ball brother getting suspended. But he ends up playing in, first was it Lithuania, and then going to Australia, where they then bought the team he was playing for. So pretty crazy, and it looks like he's going to end up being top 3 pick.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, no doubt.
So is that just because he is that talented, or did the route he took end up being the right one for him?
No. I think he's an anomaly. I mean, the kid's 6'9". He can shoot, he can dribble, he can, pass. He's different. He's not the normal college basketball player, the normal high school basketball player. I don't think he benefited from all his international tours. I mean, Lithuania was not a good place for him. He was 15, 16. He was playing against grown men. He was getting pushed around. He really took some time to adapt to that kind of game. And I think if he would have stayed the high school route, he could have, grown gradually, playing against competition that maybe wasn't as good for him, but really would have helped him during his growth spurt, because he went from like 6'2" to 6'7" from like 16 to 17 years old. Like, his height really increased during that time. And I don't know, I think he's definitely the anomaly there. But I think his time in Australia was way better because he had fully grown. He put some muscle on,
Mm-hmm.
and he was really learning how to play the game and really mastering the game at that point. Whereas in Lithuania, he was just kind of going run and gun, and he's going to go try to shoot a layup or shoot a half-court shot. That's kind of what he was looking for there.
So if we never knew the name LeVar Ball and those three boys, all three played for UCLA, that would have benefited him more?
Absolutely. I think absolutely. I mean, UCLA would have been a powerhouse back, like it was in the 70s. And they would have been, the NCAA would have made, teams play like UCLA against Duke and UCLA, Michigan State. In those games, you could definitely gain some experience. And I think college basketball would have been good for him. But Australia seemed to work out.
Selvin, I'm interested to hear your take on, you mentioned playing with and against some of the stars in college basketball recently. And corruption has been a headline that has plagued the NCAA for the past 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's a deterrent for players when they are thinking, should I go the college basketball route or should I go overseas? But I don't really want to get involved in all this corruption that's happening. Do you think players are even thinking about that?
No, I don't think they're thinking about the corruption. I think I'm not going to name the player, but I know a player who was a top 10 recruit in some point in the 2010s-ish class who had, all the big schools. I'm talking all the big schools. And corruption came into play where he received some money, some gifts from boosters or donors, whatever it may be. And he went to a different school, a much smaller school, where instead of him being one and done, which was his plan, he stayed for 4 years, never made it to the NBA, and kind of that story. And so definitely the corruption thing, I don't think they think about the negative aspects. They think about, I'm about to make $60K. They're going to buy me an Escalade, and I'm about to be the big man on campus. Like, who wouldn't want that at that age? At that age. But it just doesn't seem to work out sometimes because some of these big high school stars kind of fizzle out in college. Is it because they didn't work hard? Is it because it's a combination of things?
Yeah, that all makes sense. So we've captured your views on basically every angle of this so far.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question that I'll ask you related specifically to this topic is, what do you think is the future of all this, playing overseas, going to Australia and New Zealand instead of going to Duke and Kentucky? How do you see this panning out?
I really think if Jalen Green and someone else joined him, I can't remember what other high school recruit joined him for the G League thing, but I think if it works out for them, I think it's going to be the streamline. I think all these top players are going to go there and really just develop, make some money, get your name out there in the NBA. And I think that's going to be the route. I think some players will go the traditional college basketball route because it's a cool thing, like being the man on campus, being the guy who wins a NCAA title. Like that may be some of those guys' goals, along with getting to the NBA. So it's going to be a player-by-player thing. I think the international feel might actually go down in the future just because the G League option is much better. You get to make as much money. You get to play about the same competition. And you get to stay in America, which is a huge thing because people don't like moving to a different country like Lithuania or, a couple of people move to China. Like that's a complete different culture. It's a hard move. It's going to be a year thing. You just don't really feel at home. And so I think players will probably lean towards the G League.
Yeah, that makes sense. You answered my next question about which players would prefer to go, whether overseas or staying in the G League, and that that's definitely something that I agree with. Being able to stay close to home is big for a lot of these guys. I know.
Absolutely.
So we don't branch out a whole lot on this podcast. We usually stick to the NFL and football. But this has been a rare occasion where we have. Although if March Madness happened, I know we would be talking about college basketball.
For sure.
So we're going to go ahead and shift back to our natural stance. And we've got 2 questions related to the NFL, which I'll pass over to Logan in a second. But these are actually going to be questions that we're going to ask every guest going forward on the podcast. So we'll be able to hear every guest's opinion on this.
Yeah.
So, Selvin, give me your opinion on who the greatest quarterback of all time is and why.
I'm gonna have to go Tom. I mean, the dude's been consistent for 20 years. He came from a 6th-round pick to becoming, one of the best quarterbacks ever. He had a couple years with Randy Moss. He had a couple years with some good receivers, some good tight ends, but he's never had the offensive cast like those of Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers or any of those other top players that they consider. He's definitely the best player I've watched ever. I didn't get to watch Montana. I didn't get to watch Elway. I didn't get to watch these types of players. So I can't really put a lot of input in it. He's got, 5 Super Bowls. He's up there with Drew Brees and all the records. They're probably going to leapfrog each other throughout the whole year coming up. That hopefully happens. And so I think the clear choice would be Tom Brady.
Okay.
Good answer.
And second question, in your opinion, are wins a quarterback stat?
It's a classic Troy Aikman debate, I see. I don't know. In college, we had a couple Cowboy friends, people that were big Cowboy fans, and they said Troy Aikman was the best ever. And you look at stats. I think stats is a big, big thing. And the classic joke that we had was he has the same stats as Mark Brunell. Like, if you look at the stats side by side, A and B, both are the same, except for Troy Aikman played with the best running back ever, possibly the best offensive line ever, and a pretty darn good defense with one of the best corners ever. So, did he really do much? I don't know. You just hand it off and make 1 or 2 key passes, and they won Super Bowls, But, yeah, I think winning's important, obviously, because if a quarterback doesn't win, if you don't have a Super Bowl, you can't really be in the discussion, in my opinion.
Okay. So I want to jump back into basketball because, Selvin, you played some with Ben and I. I know you and I played on the same rec league team at least 1 year.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've played with Ben as well. I don't think, Ben, you weren't on the team with me and Selvin, were you?
Was I? I don't know. I don't think so.
I can't remember.
I don't remember. But, Selvin, give us your best analysis of Ben and I's game.
Oh, God.
Oh, goodness.
Be nice.
Ben, definitely some bully ball in there. Definitely in his days with being jacked and playing football, it was all about the toughness. It was about it's not a foul unless you're bleeding. So that's kind of my analysis there. Kind of a bowling ball down the lane, and you better watch out.
That's right. I've got bowling ball. Of basketball on the court or dorm on your knees basketball?
That's definitely both. He was a rhino down there when we were playing in dorm for sure.
That was great. Listeners, just to fill you in, we had a game where we had one of those small Nerf basketball hoops, put them in our dorm room, and it was full contact basketball. Dribbling was not required, and it was just 4 adult grown men going at it, and it was intense. It was really intense. Actually,
a lot of broken cabinets, a lot of broken
yeah, there were.
shelves.
Yeah,
a lot of spilled drinks, everything.
Yeah, really. Oh man.
And Logan, always had that head fake. Always had that little hesitation move. Going right, gonna fade. Try to knock it down.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot of fun, man. It's great having guests on the show that can come and talk about the Illawarra Warhawks and then switch and talk to Mark Brunell. So it's been fun. We've really appreciated you coming on the show, making the time for us. Got a lot of great insight from this round. You really helped us branch out a little bit from what we normally talk about. So we definitely appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and plug our Twitter page in for our listeners. You can follow us at Going for Two Pod. That's at Going for Two Pod. And we just launched an Instagram page, so you can also follow that. That's Going for Two _pod, Going for Two _pod. If you want to subscribe to our episode mailing list, you can do so at goingfor2pod19@gmail.com. Shoot us your email and we'll put you on the list. Selvin, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, for sure, guys. Y'all have a good one.
You too, man. Take care.